G'day, hi, and welcome. How does that saying go? Pray for peace, but prepare your hands for war. Now, I always call for peace and stuff like that, but this is some of the stuff floating around on Facebook as a response to the terrorist attacks in France. And I want you to look at these photos. It's not to demonize anybody. This is going to be a politically incorrect video because we live in times that are way too dangerous to be politically correct. Uh, so it is what it is. I'm not trying to demonize anything, but understand if you can keep an open mind, I don't care what side of the coin you're on. This is just an observation of what's going on around the world. Most people are not aware of because the mainstream media does not show you anything. It really does hide the truth from people, and it doesn't show you the biggest human culture clash in world history, which is brewing. Now, there's a lot of people I'm going to be picking on in this, and no, it's not just going to be Muslim bashing. I'm going to be picking on a lot of people. And the reason why I'm doing this video is, and you're probably saying, what's the credentials of this guy blabbing away? Well, my credentials are armchair warrior like anybody else, basically sitting, just observing human life through social media and stuff like that. But with that said, I don't sugarcoat things. To me, the message is much more important than the man. And I really do encourage people would share this video, not just for my own ego. Has nothing to do with that. It's the message I think is important if we truly don't want to see the biggest carnage of all. And as we get into this, I'll start to point things out, and maybe you'll agree with me, maybe you'll disagree with me, and that's fine. But what's happening right now is people are getting ready to choose a side. Now, choose a side for what, you might say? Well, for the 10th Crusade. You're saying, what the heck are you talking about? Well, hear me out on this. We've had 9 crusades in history from the Christian point of view, and we've had over 540 crusades from the Muslim point of view. Now, this argument whether who's moderate, who's not, jihadists don't speak for Islam, and not the KKK doesn't speak for Christianity, and Zionism doesn't speak for Judaism. I get all that, but the thing is what you can take a little bit of comfort in knowing that most of the world is actually full of, you guessed it, peaceful, moderate people. Very, very peaceful people. Most people get up in the morning, doesn't matter where they are in the world, they get up, they go to work, they do whatever they gotta do, and that's it. That's the end of their day. They don't hate anybody, they don't want to harm anybody. I've never hurt anybody. Many people listening to this say, hey, I've never hurt anybody, don't throw me in the group with those guys. But that's not the people we're worried about. So when you see all these people coming out in front of the cameras for or against what's going on in the world, particularly pertaining to, say, the refugees over there, the refugee crisis, the recent the attacks on France, in Paris there, and people looking at it, some are blaming Islam in the whole, and there's many Muslim leaders coming out there saying, it doesn't speak for our religion, and I believe those guys. I really do. But the thing is those aren't the guys you have to worry about. The moderates will always come out, and whether they're on the Christian side or on the Muslim side, it doesn't really matter. They're going to come out and they're going to say, hey, that's not us. So where's the problem? Well, the problem's pretty clear. It's not the moderates, it's the radicals. Now, radical always begets radical. This is something that people must understand. And to be politically correct about it and say that it's like hugging a tiger or a crocodile. You're going to lose an arm. I use this saying quite a bit. The Chinese have a proverb that goes something along the lines of, a puppy knows not the dangers of a tiger. And this is how I view different religions. The most dangerous religion right now on the planet, I know what most people are thinking, it's Islam, it's Islam. No, it's actual progressivism. Because it is a religion. And its ideology of political correctness is what keeps people blinded to truth. But also, when that paradigm of reality switches to the real world, so to speak, and people realizing what it actually does, that's when you see true evil emerge. Meaning, in a kind of a statement, communism in any form or shape usually always fails. Now, what we're witnessing in the world is a little bit of a misnomer, because you have people saying the far right is clashing with the far left. Now, the problem is it's actually not that way at all. It's the left clashing with the left clashing with the left. Case in point. What everybody calls right-wing extremism is actually really left-wing fascism. Whether they're neo-Nazis or ultra-fascists or nationalists, those are left-wing groups. They're collective-based. So even their economics are based more upon fascism than anything. And in fact, a nationalist socialist, such as what Hitler's party was, which they call right-wing for some crazy reason, but you'd think the name would tell you what it was. Nationalist socialist is basically communism with money. So in other words, really fascism. And what we're up against around the world is tons of fascism. Most countries are socialist, fascist, or fascist in nature, whether how they do their politics, as well as how they do their economics, which is where the problem lies, because it leads to the ultimate kind of fascism, which is known as globalism, which people will blame capitalism for, which globalization is not capitalism. It's not even close to capitalism. Again, it's on the left. Capitalism, the only capitalists on this planet right now are like drug dealers. You got a drug addict and a drug dealer doing a trade. Not that I'm condoning this, but they'll do a trade within each other with no government intervention in between. As soon as you start putting on regulations and such, you start increasing fascism. And once your complete economy is controlled by the government with rules and regulations, you're under complete fascism. So you'd say, what does that have to do with anything? Well, it has everything to do with everything. Because of the banking system, the Rothschild, Rockefellers, those type of big banking systems, which we're talking about the IMF and the Federal Reserve in the States, which is all owned by the Rothschilds. And then all the oil, which is pretty much owned by Rockefeller families. We're talking Shell, Exxon, all these things at the very top are either Rothschild or Rockefeller owned. So it's the ultimate monopoly. Now, you will never hear this on the mainstream media for two reasons. Number one, the media is controlled by the same corporations that own everything else. And number two, if you want to control the world, you obviously have to manipulate it, right? So the best way to find out who's controlling you is, well said, find out who you can't criticize. So this is where some ideologies are going to start to come in. Now, things like the Islamic State and stuff like that are relatively new in our history. But jihad is very, very old. It's not new. In fact, it's been around for, pretty much since the time of Muhammad, which is pretty much the original, Muslim crusader, so to speak, in the sense of a conqueror. Now, were there guys before him? Sure, there were tons of guys before him. But the difference between Muhammad and all the other Muslim crusaders before him was the fact that he claimed to be a prophet. So with that, the following changed. Now, for the most part, people look at most of the Christian crusades and say they were wrong, they were barbaric, they were just trying to spread Christianity all over the place. But most people don't understand what led up to most of the crusades. The crusades, and I'm not trying to make apologies for anybody. Yes, the crusades were brutal no matter which side they come from. But most of the crusades, a lot of them were 10 years in the making, meaning they were fending off Muslim aggressions from other countries. And you can look at each crusade in its individual, just to get an idea of what was going on. But they were basically responses to Muslim invasions. And in that sense, what ended up happening, some of them would take 10 years before they would actually go to a crusade. Crusades were expensive. Crusades were very taxing. Crusades were difficult. I mean, the probably most legendary Third Crusade with, Saladin and Richard the Lionheart is probably a great example of, how difficult a crusade would have been. That type of deal. But we had 9 crusades in our history, so why wouldn't there be a 10th one? Well, times have changed. People are not religious anymore, right? Well, kind of wrong. People are very deeply religious. It's just religions change, they evolve, they turn into different things. And it doesn't mean they're always going to turn into bad things, but you might see new religions that you would never expect. One religion that kind of stays behind the scenes in all this is really Zionism, which is not that old in itself. It was pretty much adopted in the late 1800s to early 1900s, where you really started to see it flourish. And from that time, out of Zionism was created the Bolsheviks, which was communism, to overthrow the czars in Russia. And then, of course, there was, you guessed it, Nazism. And that one, so you had the Bolsheviks, communism, and then Nazism, which was kind of a product of Zionism when you really look at who financed World War II. And of course, obviously the jihadist movements. That's pretty much a spin-off of a war between the Zionists and Islam. Now, you'd say, how would you know this? What references can we use for this? Well, Albert Pike's letter, some people claim it never existed, but pretty much word for word, every single thing he talked about in that letter, which apparently used to be on display in a museum in England, and a Canadian intelligence officer reported on it back in 1975-76, and then the letter mysteriously disappeared and everybody denied that it ever existed. But the problem is the contents of Albert Pike's letter is still around. Now, Albert Pike was a part of a different religion known as Freemasonry. Now, you'd say Freemasonry and the Christian Crusaders and the Knights Templar have a lot in common, and you would be correct. So they did change. They did change. The players changed, but the religions are still there. Now, at the very top of the religions, above the Zionist, the ones that probably control the Zionist, is the Luciferians. Now, the Luciferians are the ultimate to destroy all religions. Now, in order to do this, through the sayings of Albert Pike, what must happen is you must have 3 world wars. And Albert Pike describes the First World War, the Second World War perfectly, and the Third World War, he pretty much, we're seeing the fruits of his labor now. So was Albert Pike a visionary? No, he was telling us what the plan was. That's my take on it. That's why they probably hid the letter. So what is the third plan? Well, to crush, using progressivism basically, or the atheist, unleashing the atheist on the nihilist, basically to destroy Christianity at its core, true Christianity. And I don't even claim to be a Christian myself. But with that said, that is the goal. And to make it so obsolete that it just can't do it, it can't accomplish anything. But to get true Luciferianism, what they wanted to do is basically have Islam and basically Judeo-Christians, Judaism and Zionism and Islam completely clash together, which they are completely, in order to completely wipe each other out. And this would be the catalyst for World War III. And we are seeing it behind the doers are the Zionists behind the scenes. Now, how does the jihadists play in all this? Well, that's the incredibly barbaric army that's unleashed on humanity as a scourge of the earth, right? And that scourge of the earth is obviously going to be pretty terrifying. And the thing about that is, when we really look at it, okay, at its core, the religions haven't really changed that much in thousands of years. And the catalyst hasn't changed that much in thousands of years. And nor has the recipe for a crusade. The crusade is always a response to an invasion. So what is that invasion? It's usually from Islamic countries. Now, I'm not bashing on Muslims, but that's the historical norm. So what is different from today? Well, today you no longer have Saladin and Richard the Lionheart duking it out, or your, your Ottoman Turks, clashing with your, Templar Crusaders, that type of thing. You don't have that. What you have now is jihadists, which haven't really changed much. Their cause is still the same, a one world caliphate, but they're now clashing with a different type of crusader. And this new crusader is low in numbers right now. And the new crusader is basically neo-Nazis and nationalists. Now, nationalists are not necessarily neo-Nazis, and you have to understand this. Now, this might sound a little offensive to some people, but they don't understand how it plays out in the bigger picture. And when you see it in the bigger picture, then you'll understand why it's a crusade. So, first off, I have to make a claim that is going to offend a lot of people, but it is a true claim. You've heard me say, if you follow this channel, that not all Muslims are, jihadists. I know this. It's statistically, I got statistics to prove this. But I'm going to say something else that's probably going to offend people even more. And although it's not commonly believed, but not all white people are racist. In fact, they're way less racist than they've ever been in history. You're saying, what are you talking about? We got Black Lives Matter, we got this going on, we got... Hear me out on this, keep an open mind. The reason why I'm saying that is, this is what's what's keeping the crusade from going, is the politically correct left, particularly with the white people, and white people not wanting to hurt anybody in general. Now you can say, yeah, but there's wars here and there's wars there and stuff. Yes, you would be correct. I'm not saying this isn't manufactured. But what I'm saying is the average white person now, particularly in Europe, particularly in Canada, particularly in the United States, is extremely tolerant. Their fear is to be called racist and bigot. That's the biggest fear of white people. That's their biggest fear. It's that simple. Now for me, I don't care. Why? Because the message is much more important than the man. What I'm telling you right now is the blueprint. The non-racist whites that are out there, which are the types that believe in like white privilege and all these things, without looking into, they just look at the cherry pick stats. They don't look at the grander picture and realize that it's a sham and whatever. But here's the thing. The non-racist whites are starting to become racist. They are starting to break out of their normalcy bias of hugging crocodiles, and they're starting to learn the dangers of that tiger. And what is that? Well, it's Islamification of Europe is the big one. The mass migration is really kicking it off. Now, we've been under mass migration in Western countries now for at least 40 years through multiculturalism, which really doesn't mean multicultural. You have an Irish guy, a Scottish guy, a British guy, a Polish guy, an Australian guy. You've got multiculturalism right there. They all have different beliefs. What they're really talking about multiculturalism is multiracial. But the multicultural aspect of it, if you look where the mass immigration is coming from, it's coming from a lot of Muslim countries over there in Europe. They pretty much have the floodgates open. Now, we've been doing it here in Canada for 40 years. We're 23% of our population is not Caucasian or white. So we're still pretty tolerant here. Hate crimes are not really that high. Stuff like that. But it will rise. Europe is a different story. In Europe, you're starting to see ultra-nationalist movements really flourish since 2010, which is the kickoff of the build-up to the largest human culture clash in history, known as the 10th Crusade. Now what's happening is people are seeing all these Muslims flooding in to their country, and they are Muslims. Yes, there are some Christians. They're seeing maybe 20% of the refugees coming in, or asylum seekers, or economic migrants. Maybe 20% of them are actual Syrians from the war zone that actually need the help and are, basically persecuted, Coptic Christians and etc., etc., because they're the most persecuted over there by ISIS right now. You definitely don't want to admit you're a Christian over there. It will get you killed. Over 12,000 Christians have been killed, beheaded pretty much by the Islamic State. It doesn't make the mainstream news because, again, it's not supposed to. So here's what's happening. People are seeing 80%, the other 80% as young, strong, ready to fight, willing to fight, young Islamic men, which are running up and down European streets, trashing the place, yelling Allahu Akbar, threatening things. There was people that threw a banner over a bridge in France today, or in Germany, I can't remember exactly where from the making of this video, saying your children will learn, Sharia, that type of thing. So there's definitely an ideology clash there. Now, I get it when people get defensive and say, well, that's not my ideology, they're hijacking my religion. I agree with you, but you're not the problem. You're not the person that's going to be the problem. The problem is the ones that have hijacked that religion, whether it's Islam, Judaism, or Christianity. It doesn't really matter. The extreme are always the extreme. Those are who you have to worry about, and that's who you should be focusing on. Now, there's a problem that people aren't witnessing, and it won't show up until it comes out full boom. And that is the completely ultra hatred from the Christian Crusader, so to speak, the modern day Christian Crusader, which might not necessarily be Christian, but they will probably most definitely all be white. Now, the reason why I'm making this video is not to say this group is better than that group. I don't know how this is going to play out. Crusades have been won and lost throughout the years. And some crusades have lasted almost as long as 100 years. And we don't know exactly which way it'll fall. But we do know this. People will fall. Lots and lots of bloodshed. So the thing is that the Christian Crusader, so to speak, hasn't united yet. But they're starting to pick their lines. People that were once tolerant are starting to become less tolerant and starting to become more vocal about it. In other words, these nationalist groups, which used to only get about 10, 20 people coming out, turn to maybe rallies of 1,500. Like the EDL, Front National there in France, Paglia, if I say it right, there over there in Germany. Those guys, and over there in Poland, I forget what their guys are, all these defense leagues that come out, they would normally get, like, say in 2010, they would get a couple of hundred people to a few thousand. Now numbers like 3,000, 5,000, 15,000, 20,000, 30,000, 50,000 people marching in protest in European streets are much more common. However, maybe even out of 50,000 people, maybe the extremes out of them might be maybe 400 or 500 guys that would actually qualify as a modern crusader, that are ready to fight, that their hatred is that bad now. And once they cross that line of hate, that's it. They ain't coming back. So why is this important to know? Well, we know with the jihadists, okay, their line of hate has already been crossed. You can't reason with them. You can't bargain with them. They will not stop. There's only one way to deal with a jihadist, which is a loyalist. And that's a different type of religion. If we look at the movie Captain America, for example, the Red Skull's army, who controls these kind of Nazi-esque looking guys known as the Hydra. Now, I've been talking about these guys popping out of the woodwork in 2012. I talked about it, and sure enough, they didn't disappoint. They came out of the woodwork in the numbers like I said they would. I didn't know who they were going to be, and sure enough, they came out. And that happened to be the jihadists that we see now, that this unification of jihadists. So what brought the jihadists together? Well, the banner is ISIS. Because ISIS is an ideology. It's not a group of people. It's several groups of several tribal regions. It's several groups of it's an ideology. It's a one world caliphate. Basically the rise of the Ottoman Empire without the Ottoman Turks. Now, they'll fight amongst themselves as they always do for who's going to control this new one world caliphate, and that's going to be what it's going to be. But at the end of the day, there's something bigger you have to look at. These jihadists who are already committed to blowing themselves up, they don't fear death, they love death, they welcome it, and you just listen to these young men talk, and you get an idea that you gotta pretty much kill them. That's the only. They're a disease. There's no way to stop these guys other than killing them. In other words, you're guaranteed a crusade. Because the alternative is complete genocide on one side or the other. Now, their side is already fighting. Their side is already prepared to fight. The problem is what made them so powerful is being backed by Western money. For example, the ISIS guys were selling oil to the Turks and to the Saudis, and the Saudis in return were giving the ISIS guys weapons on behalf of Israel and the United States, which again, they were thinking more of proxy army to overthrow Assad there, because again, it's about oil. If you follow I don't want to divert too much into that Syrian crisis thing too much, because it's really about resources and oil. It's your typical globalistic religion that we're dealing with, and Zionism is also dealing there. But the thing is these guys have united under a banner. So basically the new banner of the new Islamic Crusader is ISIS. That's it. That's your Riders of Khorasan. That's your many of these guys are fighting for, well, there's typically three reasons. Reason number one is mercenaries. Mercenaries are used for proxy wars, and these guys, they're as loyal as you pay them, and that's what a lot of these mercenaries in Syria are, who they are. The second one is the guy who's had his family blown up by a drone strike or whatever, has done nothing to anybody, and hears on the US news that we killed XYZ men and people, and there was some collateral damage. Whenever you hear the term collateral damage, they're not talking about buildings and bridges and stuff like that. They're talking about the amount of people they've killed that day that weren't supposed to technically be killed, but they were stupid and they got in the way of the bombs, right? So that's what they're telling you. Those people, again, let's paint this scenario, and I've painted this gruesome scenario a few times because you need to understand the mindset that you're going to be dealing with. Guy comes home from work in the hot Afghan sun, after digging, through that dry desert garden, trying to, grow food for his family. Comes back to a house smoldering rubble from a U.S. Hellfire missile, to find his wife, on the lawn, shrapnel to death and half on fire, and part of his kid's arm in the living room, the other part of his kid's brain splattered on the wall, and the other kid out in the yard lying there burning with the eyes singed out of the skull. He's going to get kind of mad. Realistically, who isn't going to be mad at that? He's going to pick up an AK and vengeance. He will have his jihad. And that man, you will not be able to stop him. The mercenaries, those are probably going to be the easiest to stop, because you can just pay them from one side to the other. And treachery and betrayal in every crusade has always been on the behalf of the mercenaries. Meaning, this side will sell out to that side. So, for example, the Italian mob, which is now helping arm jihadists going into and human trafficking of refugees going into the Europe. Well, these guys they have no loyalties to their country or anything like that, so they will do the same thing. These guys will be the equivalent of the mercenaries, and they'll just, they're as loyal as you pay them, so they'll sell arms to anybody. And then you have your third type of jihadist, the one that you must fear the most, and this is the one that believes what he's saying. This is the one that is really believing the end times prophecy, the day of reckoning is here, and he is waiting for the black flags of Khorasan and the Al Mahdi, basically what Christians will refer to as the Antichrist, and what they refer to as the Messiah, also to give rise to Jesus and to give rise to Muhammad. And Jesus will come back as a man and serve beside the Al Mahdi. Now, you might not believe this, but they believe this full-heartedly. So they see democracy JDAMs blasting through the Middle East, killing Muslim after Muslim. And in the Quran it says, whenever Muslims are killed everywhere, it's the end times. So they believe this. They've got that jump on us, and you'll hear people come out and say, "Well, no, these are, it has nothing to do with Islam." Well, it does. So again, the thing we have to say, well, how does it have to do with Islam? Well, it's about interpretation. Now, I'm getting this from Islamic people telling me, well, the problem isn't so much with the Quran itself, it's how it's interpreted. This is why you have different Muslim factions, Shia, Sunni, Alawite, Wahhabist, Kurdish, the list goes on and on, And same with Christianity, you have different beliefs of the Bible, Protestant, Christian, Judeo-Christian, Catholic, the list goes on and on. So with that said, yes, these people believe what they're saying. They believe their rhetoric. They believe they're in the end times prophecy, and they're going to do their Muslim duty because their book told them so. Now, not all Muslims believe the same thing, hence why you will have moderates and you won't. But we're not worried about the moderates, which even though they are the majority. And there's another thing you need to know statistically, that 58% of Muslims around the world, which is about 1.3 to 1.6 billion people on this planet, 58% of them believe in Sharia law. Now, in Western countries, for example, like the UK, about 16% of Muslims believe in it. Here in Canada, it's a little lower, maybe about 5 or 6% believe in Sharia law. And in the States, I can imagine, the Western countries will probably have a lower thing, but globally, we're looking at a global jihad, big time. Now, who are the big funders of this? Well, Saudi Arabia being one of the biggest funders, but they're also backed by the United States and stuff like that, and same with Turkey. These are the two, their government officials were out there praising how they were going to conquer Europe in basically the Crusader countries. They're going to conquer the Crusader countries, and Saudi Arabia's response to the Muslim crisis was to resurrect 200 mosques throughout Europe. So if you don't think a Crusader is just, again, the Crusade is already here, it's just now people have to scramble which line they're going to run across. So the politically correct will die horribly. The politically correct will die horribly because they're going to still be out there hugging tigers. You can't level with a jihadist. It's not going to happen. So what happens when the so-called right wing, which is really left-wing fascism, the left fighting with the left, wants to, finally gets pushed over that line? When that first penguin jumps off the iceberg and the rest follow, so to speak. This is where we could see, well, it's going to be biblical no matter how you look at it, and I don't mean that as a figure of speech. It will be biblical. It will be the most bloodiest violence you ever seen once the so-called white Christian crusader, we'll call them Christian crusaders, even if they're not necessarily going to be Christians. Their belief system is to kill jihad. In other words, both sides become extremely nihilistic. And you could see this between, for example, Navy SEALs. Their goal in life, they become loyalists to the cause of killing jihadists, right? Well, jihadists become loyalists to the cause of killing the kafir, which is pretty much anybody that's not Muslim. So, if you don't see the problem in that, it means loyalist versus loyalist. Both sides are brainwashed and convinced that they're right. And with that said, anybody caught in between these two will be slaughtered. They will be slaughtered in the masses. You'll say that that's not true. That won't happen. Well, it's happening. Uh, it is what it is. It's the 10th Crusade. So prepare wisely, right? Now you're probably saying to yourself, this guy's just racist and bigot. And he just wants to hold back people. No. If I was really, what I'm calling for is peace. What I'm calling for is moderation. What I'm calling for is recognize the danger. So there is a way out of this without getting into a big-ass brutal crusade, which could last for hundreds of years. I say within 200 years there will be no Islam on the planet, or within the next 10 years Islam will rule the world. It's going to be one way or the other. We're in that crusade. We're in that, maybe not final crusade. I don't think we'll ever have a final crusade, but we're in probably the most critical one of all time because of mobility. The Third Crusade, it took Richard the Lionheart basically 2 months or 3 months or 6 months to get the ships from England to Jerusalem, right? Nowadays, jihadists can be in your country within 6 hours, whatever the flight time is. So let's pick extreme to extreme. Ottawa to, say, Australia. 18 hours is the max it's going to take to get from here to there. So whether it be Perth or Queensland or Sydney, it wouldn't take that long. But here's one thing a lot of people don't understand about the organization of the jihadists, is that jihadist A, jihadist B knows what the plan is. So you take jihadist A in Australia and drop them off over in England, or drop a jihadist in England over off in Canada or the United States. They meet up with other jihadists. There's no coordination needed. They already know what the plan is. And the doctrine is pretty simple. It's just a matter of finding the right martyrs to blow themselves up. The rest don't blow themselves up. The rest train guys. Now, unfortunately, our governments have alienated us, and they do want this to happen big time, because weapons have been coming in. Blind eyes have been looked over there in Sweden. There's, they've, recently found weapons in a refugee camp. In France, they got a ship boatload full of weapons coming in for the jihadists. You have jihadist after jihadist saying, yes, we're already in Europe. So there's nothing stopping it at this point, except for possibly isolation. So this would be the only solution, which most likely will not happen, but because it would require people to break out of the strongest religion out of all of them is political correctness, meaning you're going to have to close your borders to all Muslim countries until you can sort out who's who. You're going to have to deport people, you're going to have to put people in jail, and you may even have to kill a few. That's what's going to happen. So once the terrorist, and I think the catalyst for this is going to be lost in complete psychopathic rage on the side of the Christian crusaders, so to speak. Once they start slaughtering, they're not going to stop. They'll be worse, 10 times more brutal than the ISIS guys could ever imagine. And they will most likely start in the east, because that's where the threat is coming from. So how they get there, I don't know, but it makes more sense. They're going to start slaughtering in the east. Where in the east? Well, it's going to be one of the countries, probably bordering one of the most, like Syria, or it could even start in a place like Lebanon. It could start there. But in Europe, it's most likely, in my opinion, to start in England. Even though the France attacks, I'm still saying England. Germany is a close second because of the groups. But possibly the third, even before France, even after this attack, even before France, we could see like a group, say like Golden Dawn. I'm expecting them to start mowing people down with machine guns any day now. These guys will be the ultra-nationalists, of course. They haven't done it yet. Why? Because they're still moderate. But it just takes one guy to jump off the one penguin to jump off the iceberg, and then they all follow. And at that point, it won't matter what the world armies are. They just will not be able to stop these crusaders. It's kind of like a kitty cat getting a taste of bloody meat for the first time. They start to roar, and they're all proud and stuff like that. Well, these jihadists and crusaders are going to be the exact same. They're two sides of the same coin. Their goal in life is to wipe each other out. They're the dark, they're the light, they're the yin, they're the yang. They cannot exist without killing each other. They will not be able to exist without killing each other. Their whole purposes in life is to kill each other. It's just the jihadists are calling us out. That's all. We haven't responded yet. Now you'd say, yeah, but there's wars in the Middle East and there's bombing. That's not the crusade I'm talking about. I'm talking about the populist crusade. The people, not the armies, the people. And what could some examples that I could use? Well, the nationalist movements, say, for example, in like Ukraine or Russia. Right now, the Ukraine's tied up in a civil war that was, again, basically at the top, orchestrated by the Zionists, George Soros, those type of people, to basically fund the neo-Nazi groups to overthrow the government, which has led into the clash between using old rivals from World War II between the Nazis and the communists, so to speak, the Red Army, and they use basically neo-Nazi groups such as the Azov Battalion, and right now they're doing brutality against ethnic Russian people and vice versa. So against the DPR and the LPR, whatever, and those two guys are clashing, and they're doing extremely brutal things to each other, and that's what they're willing to do to each other. But when they turn on the Muslim population over there, it's going to be 10 times more brutal. And we can look at several places in Eastern Europe where genocides have happened against Muslim populations when the people there become insolvent, to the point where we don't like these people anymore. We don't care who the moderates are. We're rounding them all up and we're going to put them in a ditch. And that's happened several times as recently as 1990s. Even in early 2000s. Milosevic over there. These things happen. But that's going to happen Europe-wide. Now, Canada and the United States, I think would be the last to join the Crusades, if at all, just because of the difference in multiculturalism, the difference in resolve, and the fact that really, realistically, there's not the jihad isn't here. Even the small amounts of jihad that could be here, it's not like Europe. Europe, a lot of people don't realize in this migrant crisis, up to possibly 2 million people have flooded into Europe. Some say as low as 300,000, some say as high as 2 million. So we don't know what the number is, but we do know at least 10,000 people per day are flooding into Sweden. At least, Germany's the same. 3,000, 6,000, 8,000 people showing up every day. You're seeing the nationalist groups, for example, in Poland, 30,000 people taking to the street overnight saying, no, Poland's a Christian country, we're only going to bring in Christian refugees. They're out there saying, even though other governments calling them racist and bigot, whatever, right now after the France attack, I think people are kind of, again, going to be the people that were completely politically correct are moving to the center, saying, okay, well, maybe we need to rethink this. We can't just believe everybody's sweet and innocent. We actually have to look at it as, hey, wait a minute, we got to vet the people that are coming in. And that's what should have been done in the first place. And it wasn't done on purpose. Now, this comes back to the economy thing. What I'm thinking they're doing with the migrants is to use it to collapse the euro and instead of blaming the bankers, which are Zionist-owned, Rothschild Zionist-owned, what they're going to do is say, oh, well, the reason why the European Union collapsed is because of the strain of the migrant crisis, and with the terrorist attacks, nobody went shopping at Christmas because everybody was too scared to go anywhere. So it would be very convenient, and it's an easy scapegoat, and that's how these psychopaths at the top think. But they get killed in all this too, because the people are turning on their governments. They are definitely turning on their governments worldwide. It doesn't make it on the mainstream media, but it doesn't matter. People are starting to see what's going on. Now, that also leaves us with the ugly end game that could happen once this crusade goes truly violent, and you have two completely recognizable, opposing groups, jihadists versus crusaders, and the crusader countries will lash out on. And I've said this not to be cruel, not to be mean, but because I don't like seeing people hurt each other, period, or I wouldn't make these videos. I don't speak in politically correct terms to try to dumb it down for you. We're way past that. It's too dangerous. This is going to happen, but the degree level is what I mean. My best thing that I could hope for is people to hate each other in peace at this point, but it's not going to happen. There will be the solidarity movements and stuff like that are just delaying the inevitable. What must happen is segregation, meaning the Muslims will not, and not just Muslims, it's going to be anybody pretty much with dark skin. You're going to see true racism, and then you're going to be longing for these times that we're in now where everybody's politically correct, but you're going to see real racism, kind of like you'd see in Russia, where the skinheads there, they go around, they beat people up, they stab them, they kill them. Some of the nationalist groups in Russia, the nationalist group in Russia called the Russians, some of those guys apparently cut people's heads off and keep them in the freezer for trophies. You'd say, oh, that wouldn't happen. Jihadists can be radical. Anybody can be radical. It's just a matter of pushing them in the right direction. Yes, there is a lot of Western intervention in the Middle East that has created all this. There's no doubt about that. But from a populist point of view, it's to get people not to engage in it. So the only way you can do that is, number one, close your borders. France, for some reason, they couldn't close their border during the migrant crisis, but for some reason they can do it now. Heck, even Calais, where they call it the jungle, where they got 6,000 migrants, they're locking those migrants in there. The place was put on fire last night or the night before after the attacks. I have no idea who did it, if it was the actual ISIS guys that were there just burning their evidence that they were there, or if it was actual nationalist groups. But there have been nationalist groups uprisings in retaliation of the France attacks. They're only going to get much worse. Now the thing is the people that, for example, don't know what the new Crusaders are going to look like. Well, I refer to them as, they're going to be probably like an army of like Anders Brevniks. Remember the Norway shooter? Picture him coming out in about 1,000 to 20,000 guys. That's what it's going to look like. It's not going to happen overnight, but when it happens, it's going to happen overnight. So I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow. It's just I don't know when. But I'm saying when these guys come out, they're going to be as radical as the jihadists. They're going to be 10 times more brutal, and they're going to be 20 times more organized. There's no doubt about that. And what we will fall into after that is complete. If you think the Middle East looks bad now, Europe will burn. It will burn because of this. And out of that, who knows what kind of hierarchy will come out of that. Now, the world elites think that they're going to control this with you add up all the militaries on the planet, they cannot stop this thing. This is a populist uprising. No country can withstand a populist uprising, armed or unarmed, it doesn't matter. Case in point, Egypt. They've got a military. They couldn't stop 80 million people when they took to the street, and it was 80 million people. That's pretty impressive when you think about it. They overthrew that government pretty violently, and because they didn't want a Western-backed government. But you get the idea. When people have had enough, when they lose everything, they do lose it. Now the problem we're going to have with these Christian crusaders is that anything that opposes them, including it won't matter if you're white or black or whatever, if you oppose these guys, you will be dead. Why? Because they're not going to be behaving like Christians. They're going to be behaving like skinheads and neo-Nazis. That's what they're going to be behaving like. And if you're thinking I'm demonizing white people on this, I'm not. I'm telling you that the people that are radical begets radical. If you're going to have a radical jihadist who's calling out the West and the Crusader countries. They already know they're in the 10th Crusade. They just haven't called it the 10th Crusade, but they know they're in the Crusade. They know it's a crusade. They've been saying it for years, but they know, and they've been saying it a lot more now. So they're picking the fight based upon a response to something. So why are all these jihadists out there in the first place? Well, simple. We're bombing the shitballs out of their countries on lies like weapons of mass destruction with George Bush, Libya, with no congressional approval to go into Libya, an illegal war there with Hillary Clinton and Obama. And the list goes on and on. And then, of course, the illegal war in Syria. We're doing all these regime changes, propping up these Middle Eastern proxy groups, which usually end up turning into ISIS in the end. So I don't know how this game is going to play out in the end. But it is beginning, and people are starting to pick their sides. Now, we know the jihadists have pretty much picked their sides, and that's pretty easy to see. The people that are going to hesitate on the fence, so to speak, of who they're going to support in all this, again, will be caught between jihadist and crusader. And to be caught between that is a death sentence. It is a death sentence. When these guys come out, and they are coming out, you're starting to see them in small numbers. For example, again in Sweden, you had that guy go in with a sword, and this guy is one. Again, the crazies will always snap first, but this guy's one guy, but he's got supporters. Norway, the Breivik has supporters. People look to him as a hero. This guy killed 90 people, right? And you have to understand that it's not people accepting the violence. It's people are getting desperate and scared. And scared on one side, scared on the other, and leading to that hatred. And that line of hate, once it gets crossed, that's it. There's no going back. It's a taste of blood. They will not retreat, neither side. In other words, both sides have to wipe each other out, just like Albert Pike said. And then from there, people are supposed to adopt Luciferian ideology. But I don't think that works either. Why? Because in the end, I do believe good will prevail. I don't know who's going to be. And I don't know when it's going to be. And hopefully it doesn't get that bad, but I think it will. I know it will, because it is getting bad. You have people running up and down the streets clashing with each other. You have these gigantic packs of Muslim migrants going around beating people up, yelling Allahu Akbar. Women getting raped throughout Europe. You have all these open admissions from Muslim leaders saying, yes, we're going to conquer Europe, and their women need to be raped because they're the whores and whatever, and they're the kafir, right? And kill them where you find them. So there's only so much that a progressive is going to be able to take. And I think the progressives, the ones that do switch over to the neo-Nazi side, are going to be the worst. I think they're going to be the most tyrannical. Why? Because you've busted their ideology. You've broke their normalcy paradigm. And it's going to be completely brutal. What methods will be used? Well, we're in the era of modern warfare. Use your imagination. Again, I don't call for violence. The only way we can stop this is basically, number one, cut off immigration, all countries. Isolate the Islamic State, beef up your borders, arrest the world elites that have built this. They made this happen. You can start with names like Rockefeller, Jacob Rothschild, John D. Rockefeller. You can go for Evelyn Rothschild. You can get Zebra Brzezinski, Henry Kissinger for sure, George Soros, one of the biggest, craziest douchebags of humanity, Obama, his entire administration, Tony Blair, his entire administration, Rumsfeld. Get these people, Netanyahu, get him, all those Zionists over there, get them. The people that were complacent in it, in the top of the medias, get them. All those people. All those people. Because at the end of the day, and of course the Bushes, and then of course, then after that we need to deal with isolating Turkey and Saudi Arabia, because that's where most of this radicalness it comes from. And to stabilize Syria, we need to back the Syrian army. You don't have to back Assad, but you do have to back his army to get rid of that. And we'll have to wait and see. But as far as Europe, Europe has to discriminate on its borders, saying no, we're full, we're closed. That's the only way out of it. And they have to start deporting people. They have to round the people up that are running amok, because again, you round them up, you get called racist bigot now, but I can tell you this: if you let these people create the paradigm of jihad throughout Europe, well, all I'll say is the crusade is just beginning. Alright, so anyway, if you like this kind of content, please consider making a donation to the channel. Rate, subscribe, share, comment, like. Be true to yourself, be true to others. Always do the right thing, and have yourselves a great day, eh?